Modern dating has transformed into something almost unrecognizable compared to what previous generations experienced, and many men find themselves trying to navigate rules they never agreed to. What used to be a straightforward process of genuine connection has shifted into a system driven by strategy, curated personas, and silent contests of who can appear less emotionally affected. Expectations have flipped so dramatically that sincerity often feels like a disadvantage rather than a strength. Many men step into this new landscape with honest intentions, unaware that the environment they're entering rewards emotional detachment, selective attention, and subtle psychological leverage. A simple compliment from the person they like can brighten their entire week, giving them a sense of hope and validation that feels rare. But the opposite is just as powerful. A delayed answer, a cold reply, or a sudden shift in tone can ruin their mood instantly, leaving them spiraling in overthinking and self-doubt. The emotional impact is often far greater than they realize, and it slowly conditions them to depend on responses from someone who might not care nearly as much. Without even noticing the shift, many men let their confidence, their self-worth, and even their daily mood become attached to someone who isn't offering the same level of interest or emotional involvement. Modern dating encourages chasing uncertainty, mistaking mixed signals for mystery, and rewarding the one who feels the least. In this environment, men often give their genuine emotions to someone who hasn't earned that access. What makes it worse is that they blame themselves for the imbalance instead of recognizing the system they're caught in. And before they know it, their peace is no longer controlled by them, but by the attention of someone who may never have intended to stay. Women grow up in a world that constantly validates them, often without them even noticing it. From an early age, they're surrounded by compliments, approval, and a steady stream of attention that reinforces their sense of value. Whether it's through social media likes, friendly messages, or simple everyday interactions, they are taught subtly and consistently that they should keep their options open, that commitment should be delayed until someone truly exceptional comes along, and that they themselves are the prize to be pursued. This emotional abundance becomes normal for them, creating a mindset where reassurance and interest are always available somewhere, even if not from the person they're currently talking to. Men, on the other hand, grow up with a completely different set of expectations. They are taught that nothing is given freely, that affection must be earned through effort, consistency, and proving their worth. While women are encouraged to explore, men are expected to compete. A man often enters the dating world without the built-in validation women receive, so he approaches connections hoping he will measure up. Instead of feeling like the prize, he feels like the applicant, constantly waiting to be chosen. This silent imbalance shapes behavior more than people realize. She may feel comfortable taking her time, knowing attention is abundant, while he becomes anxious, fearing he could lose her interest at any moment. She moves with confidence because the world has shown her she can. He moves cautiously because the world has taught him he has to. None of this needs to be spoken for it to define the dynamic. It lives in their expectations, reactions, and the invisible pressure placed on men to prove themselves worthy in a system where women rarely feel the same urgency. Because men invest early and intensely, the dynamic tilts long before either person realizes it. Women eventually learn, sometimes consciously, sometimes simply through experience, that silence has an effect on him. A delayed reply makes him more attentive, unpredictability keeps him guessing, and even minimal effort is often enough to keep him pursuing. It isn't that women deliberately plan this, it's that they observe how easily men react, how quickly they attach, and how strongly they respond to the slightest shift in tone or attention. Over time, these patterns teach them that pulling back rarely carries consequences, while showing too much interest can shift the balance in ways they'd rather avoid. Men, meanwhile, start adjusting their entire lives around the connection. They rework schedules, overanalyze messages, and replay conversations in their minds trying to decode meaning that often isn't there. Each response from her becomes a measurement of his worth. Was it warm, cold, short, enthusiastic? Did she use a different tone today? Did the typing bubble disappear too quickly? These tiny details begin to occupy more emotional space than they should, gradually shaping his confidence and self-perception. The imbalance deepens not because women are inherently manipulative, but because the system itself rewards emotional distance. When she is less invested, she holds more power. When he cares too early, he becomes vulnerable to every fluctuation. A woman with many options learns she doesn't need to give much to receive a lot, while a man with few emotional sources ends up giving the most to the one who gives the least. Without understanding how this cycle forms, men unknowingly hand over control. They let their happiness depend on someone who only needed to remain slightly unpredictable to keep it. Men drain themselves when they overinvest too soon, pouring emotional energy into someone who hasn't shown the same level of commitment. They chase clarity from a person who isn't offering it, convincing themselves that if they just try a little harder, say the right thing, or show their intentions clearly enough, everything will fall into place. When a woman is inconsistent, he interprets the inconsistency as a sign of chemistry or depth instead of seeing it for what it is, uncertainty. Mixed signals begin to feel meaningful, even romantic, because he hopes they hint at hidden feelings rather than a lack of them. His imagination fills the gaps her actions leave empty. He starts to believe effort itself is the solution. If he stays loyal, patient, attentive, and emotionally available, then surely she will recognize his value and match his investment. But effort cannot fix misalignment. It cannot create desire where it doesn't naturally exist. All it does is make it easier for her to engage casually, because his energy sustains the connection even when she isn't putting much into it. The more he gives, the less she has to participate. She doesn't need to initiate conversations, plan anything, or show clear interest. He's already carrying the dynamic. This imbalance isn't created by malice or manipulation, it's created by asymmetry. He is leaning forward with hope, intention, and emotional openness, while she is leaning back with uncertainty, comfort, or simple indifference. When one person moves toward the connection and the other pulls away, the gap widens. He feels desperate to close it, unaware that the more he leans in, the further she retreats. And by the time he recognizes the imbalance, he has often given more of himself than the situation ever deserved. A man regains power the moment he stops reacting to every shift in her energy, because his emotional stability no longer depends on her behavior. When he stops chasing, stops over-explaining himself, and stops treating silence as an emergency that needs immediate resolution, something fundamental shifts inside him. He begins reclaiming the independence he didn't even realize he had given away. Instead of being pulled by every fluctuation in her mood or attention, he starts moving at his own pace, guided by his own standards. This steadiness disrupts the usual dynamic. When he is no longer driven by fear of losing her, of being replaced, of not being enough, his behavior becomes calm and intentional. He doesn't rush to fix every uncomfortable moment. He doesn't panic when replies slow down. He doesn't assume distance means rejection. His reactions become measured, thoughtful, and rooted in self-respect. That shift alone changes everything. Suddenly he becomes the unpredictable one, but in a healthy, grounded way. Unpredictable not because he's playing games, but because he isn't controlled by insecurity anymore. His emotional center becomes internal rather than external. Validation feels nice, but it doesn't dictate his mood. Withdrawal doesn't shake him because he no longer assumes someone else's inconsistency is his fault. This kind of calm presence draws a different type of response. It commands respect without demanding it. It encourages clarity because it's no longer feeding an imbalance. He becomes the version of himself that acts from confidence instead of desperation, which naturally rebalances the connection. When he stops reacting, he stops bleeding energy, and that alone is enough to change the entire dynamic. Once a man becomes grounded in himself, a profound clarity emerges, allowing him to see women and their behavior in an entirely different light. He begins to recognize that what initially seemed like deliberate strategy or manipulation is often nothing more than a reflection of her own internal state. Her distance, the pauses in communication, the subtle shifts in attention, are not always tactics designed to test or control him. More often, they are rooted in her own uncertainty, her fear of vulnerability, or her need to protect herself emotionally. The mask of control that once seemed so deliberate slowly dissolves, revealing a human being navigating her own complexities, insecurities, and experiences. With this newfound understanding, he no longer blames women for the imbalance he once felt. He sees clearly how the environment, social norms, and cultural conditioning shape behavior on both sides. The system rewards emotional independence, abundance, and ambiguity, and punishes vulnerability in subtle ways. In recognizing this, he stops interpreting silence as rejection and unpredictability as a form of power over him. The patterns that once confused him no longer hold the same sway, Because he understands the underlying forces at play rather than inventing narratives based on fear or longing. Instead of reading every action as a test or manipulation, he begins to see humanity real people with emotions, doubts, and boundaries. This clarity allows him to engage without reactivity. He observes instead of overanalyzing, responds without chasing, and values alignment over excitement. What once seemed like control was never truly hers to wield, it was the result of his own uncertainty and emotional dependency. In seeing the situation with such precision, he regains perspective, compassion, and, most importantly, his own emotional sovereignty. When a man stops giving unlimited access, the entire dynamic begins to shift in ways he may not have expected. No longer available at all hours, no longer overanalyzing every text or message, he creates boundaries that protect his time, energy, and emotional well-being. This absence of automatic availability forces her to be intentional with her actions. She can no longer rely on him being constantly present to fill gaps or soothe uncertainty. She must actively decide whether to engage, how much effort to invest, and whether her interest is genuine or superficial. Without the leverage of his emotional reactivity, ambiguity loses its power. What once may have seemed like mystery or allure is stripped down to clarity. She either wants to be involved or she doesn't. When a man is no longer pulled into reacting to every minor shift in attention or tone, authenticity naturally emerges. Her true intentions surface, not because she is being forced or manipulated, but because the patterns that allowed her to operate under emotional comfort have been disrupted. She either steps closer, showing real engagement and curiosity, or drifts away, revealing disinterest or inconsistency that was always there but masked by his overinvestment. Meanwhile, he experiences a freedom he may have forgotten existed. He is grounded enough to walk away without panic or collapse, no longer allowing himself to be destabilized by uncertainty. His decisions are based on alignment, values, and standards rather than fleeting desire or hope that she will suddenly meet him halfway. He learns to choose connections that match his effort and emotional investment, rather than chasing connections that were never reciprocal. In doing so, he not only protects his emotional energy but also rewrites the entire interaction, setting the stage for relationships that are honest, balanced, and rooted in mutual respect. With emotional discipline, a man begins to filter out the chaos that once dominated his interactions and drained his energy. He no longer chases after potential or becomes entangled in relationships built on fleeting excitement rather than substance. In the past, he may have tolerated inconsistency, romanticized mixed signals, or sacrificed his own peace in pursuit of someone who was only partially present. But with discipline, he learns to prioritize what truly matters: reciprocity, stability, and clarity. He begins to recognize the value of emotional balance, knowing that his time and energy are finite resources that should be invested wisely, not scattered across situations that offer little return. This shift changes everything about how he is perceived. He becomes naturally attractive not because he engages in manipulation or plays games, but because he is anchored in himself. His confidence comes from self-respect, not external validation. He doesn't overcompensate, over-explain, or bend to meet someone else's expectations. Instead, he approaches interactions calmly, fully aware of his worth and standards. Women sense this almost immediately. They notice that he is present without being needy, approachable without being desperate, warm without being impressionable. His energy communicates strength, clarity, and independence, qualities that cannot be faked or forced. In a world where emotional uncertainty often drives attraction, he stands out precisely because he cannot be moved by it. Mixed signals no longer destabilize him, silence does not provoke anxiety. He maintains his composure, responds intentionally rather than reactively, and chooses engagement only when it aligns with his values. This grounded presence makes him rare, a man who commands respect and attention simply by being whole within himself. He is no longer swept up in the game, he observes, evaluates, and engages on his own terms, becoming someone who is both steady and magnetic in a way that few men can achieve. In the end, the illusion that women hold all the control slowly dissolves when a man fully steps into his own power. For so long, he may have believed that the shifting moods, delayed responses, and subtle ambivalence dictated his value or his chances of connection. He may have thought that control rested entirely in the hands of someone else, that his happiness depended on gaining approval, attention, or affection. But the truth is far simpler and far more liberating. control only exists when he allows it to exist. The moment he stops reacting out of fear, the moment he refuses to let another person's behavior determine his emotional state, the illusion shatters. When he chooses clarity over confusion, he begins to see situations, people, and intentions for what they truly are. He replaces insecurity with standards, understanding that compromise only matters when there is mutual respect and genuine alignment. He substitutes desperation with self-respect, knowing that his time, energy, and emotional labor are valuable and should never be given away indiscriminately. As he stands firm in these principles, the power dynamic that once seemed so imbalanced collapses naturally. He is no longer part of a game he doesn't control, he is no longer chasing validation that isn't freely given. He starts leading his own life instead of reacting to the whims of someone else. His decisions are intentional, his boundaries clear, and his presence grounded. In this state, he becomes the man who cannot be cooked, the man who chooses rather than waits to be chosen, who stands firm rather than bends, who is whole within himself rather than fractured by external uncertainty. In embodying this stability, he achieves a rare form of freedom, the freedom to engage, connect, and invest without losing himself, and the freedom to navigate the modern dating world from a position of strength, clarity, and unshakable self-respect.